When you're out there shiny hunting, what's the best Pokemon that you can have with you to make sure that you succeed? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Hello everybody, Blaine here for Bridge4 Games. So yeah, as I said in the intro there, today we're talking about shiny hunting and what Pokemon you should bring with you when you're doing it. So, as we all know, everybody loves shiny hunting, and in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, one of the best ways to shiny hunt is to use the Poke Radar to build up to a chain of 40. So, this can be a pretty difficult process because you need to actually catch a lot of Pokemon in order to get to that point, and then you actually have to deal with the shiny itself, making sure that nothing happens where you lose it, and to make sure that you catch it, no problem. So, today we're going to be talking about all the Pokemon you want to bring with you while shiny hunting to make sure that you have no problem finding these Pokemon and ultimately catching them so you can add them to your collection. So I've had a lot of requests to make a video like this one, so I've gone in-depth as possible to make sure that you guys know all of the best Pokemon that you can bring with you and you don't just have, only one or two options available to you. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in, but before we do, I just want to take a second to ask that if you like the videos we have here on the channel, please make sure that you actually like them by hitting the thumbs up button, and of course consider subscribing to the channel to become part of our amazing Pokemon community, and also to ensure that you never miss any of the awesome videos like this one. Alright, let's go ahead and start talking about what mons you need here. So, first up, we have kind of an itinerary of topics we need to cover. So, first things I want to talk about are the useful tools that you need on your team. Now, there are a few different things you really need to bring with you when you are shiny hunting these Pokemon. Now, as we all know, two of the best ways to ensure that you can catch a Pokemon are to reduce its HP and also to have it statused. Now, we're going to cover exactly what moves you want to use to do that in order to make this process as easy as possible for you. So, first up, as anybody who's ever shiny hunted before knows, you're going to want to have False Swipe. So, False Swipe is actually a TM, and a lot of Pokemon also learn it naturally, but effectively, it's a physical attack that deals damage, but always leaves the target with only 1 HP. Now, obviously, if the Pokemon would not be KO'd, through that damage, it's not going to be brought down to 1, so you may have to attack it a couple times. So typically, one of the desirable things is to actually get a Pokemon with a fairly high attack stat in order to knock it down to 1, or as close as possible to it within one shot. You don't want to spend more turns doing this than you have to, and being able to knock that thing down to 1 and start catching it is going to be awesome. As we know, in BDSP, when you're radar hunting, you really want to make sure that you're catching the Pokemon and not just knocking it out. So, in order to actually maintain your chain, you need to have a Pokemon caught every single time to get that 93% continuation bonus. Now, even though this is not perfect and that 7% of failure does accumulate, you're maximizing your odds of catching these shinies as long as you catch them every single time. And making sure they're down to 1 HP is going to be one of the easiest sort of no muss, no fuss ways to get there. Now, again, a lot of Pokemon do learn this, but the TMs are going to be your easiest way to do it because there's so many Pokemon that learn it that way that it really kind of opens the doors for you. Now, a couple things to make sure you're aware of here. When that Pokemon is down to 1 HP, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the clear. You need to make sure that you're watching out for weather. You also need to make sure that you're watching out for it struggling if it does run out of PP. Now, on top of that, a lot of Pokemon may have moves like Takedown or something like that, maybe like Double Edge. So you want to make sure that you're also watching out for the Pokemon that may have Recoil, where they can knock themselves out once they get down to 1 HP. Now, as we know, we said, lowering the HP is great, but that's not the only thing you can do. You also can status the Pokemon, and that will help quite a bit as well. So, as we can see here, the best two kinds of, status here are going to be Sleep and Paralysis. So, each of them really have their pros and cons, and we're going to talk about those right now. So, in order to improve your catching odds, Sleep and Paralysis are really going to be your best friends. Now, Freezing is also really good. It's up there with Sleep. But obviously, there's no real consistent way to freeze a Pokemon. And you just kind of don't want to do that because all the moves that let you freeze might just knock it out anyways. So, the interesting thing is that Sleep is twice as effective as Paralysis in terms of catching the Pokemon. However, sleeping Pokemon can wake up, whereas paralyzed Pokemon will stay paralyzed the entire battle unless they have something like Shed Skin or something like that. So, the tricky thing that you may want to consider is, yes, putting them to sleep is more effective, but if you do paralyze them, you can just keep, your mind on throwing Pokeballs, and you don't have to really worry about, putting them to sleep over and over again. So, it kind of depends on how you approach your catching and kind of what you want to do there. Now, that being said, something else to keep in mind, Grass Pokemon are immune to Spore and Sleep Powder, two very common sleeping moves, and Electric Pokemon can't be paralyzed. So, that obviously talks about kind of what strategy you need to make sure you bring when you're going after those types of Pokemon. Now, the moves that you're going to want to consider for sleep are going to be Spore, Sleep Powder, Hypnosis, Sing, and Yawn. Obviously, a bunch of different Pokemon get those, so you definitely want to keep an eye out, like on the Pokedex and on places like Cerebi to see, what Pokemon get which moves to make sure that you know exactly what mons you should bring. Now, Paralysis, the best ways to kind of do this are going to be Thunder Wave, Stun Spore, Nuzzle, and Glare. There are a couple other methods that were, suggested, like Static, but Static for the ability, they have to make physical contact with you, and then even there, it's not guaranteed, so I don't really kind of view that as a legit method. Sorry, anybody that's a big Static proponent, but I tend to think that you just want to make sure you get them there, and then just start throwing Pokeballs. I don't want to waste my time, letting them hit me. So, that being said, when you combine the False Swipe getting you down to 1 HP and the status moves, you really maximize your odds of attempting to catch these Pokemon. And, if a Pokemon can do both, they're going to be very, very useful for your team. Now, before we dive into all the Pokemon that are going to be super helpful, I want to talk about one other thing that not everybody kind of thinks about, and that is Synchronize. Now, we are able in this day and age to manipulate Pokemon's natures using mints. However, they are a little bit of a pain in the butt to get because you have to actually go to the post-game area in the battle area and redeem your BP for them. So that's certainly useful and helpful. Obviously, if you want your Pokemon to be competitively viable, you have to have a good nature because you really need to maximize those stats. And, obviously you want to draw from the stat that you don't care about, be it like an attacking stat or a speed stat, whatever. So if you don't want to go the mint route, another option is having Synchronize. Now, if you have a Pokemon with Synchronize lead your party and it comes out when that wild Pokemon shows up or that static encounter shows up, that Pokemon will almost always have the same nature as the Pokemon that you led with Synchronize. So, if the Pokemon that you have with Synchronize has a good nature, like an Adamant, a Jolly, a Modest, a Timid, something like that, that will happen on the wild Pokemon as well, which is incredibly useful. It saves you from having to use a mint, and then you also can just, take the Pokemon right away and start training it because that part of it's already taken care of. Now, there's not a lot of Pokemon that have access to Synchronize, but the ones that do really get kind of a benefit just because they do have access to this incredible ability. Now, when you're out there hunting Pokemon, there can be a lot of things that kind of happen that can catch you off guard and cause a lot of issues. So we're going to talk about preventing some problems real quick. So, first up, another thing that's kind of desirable is being able to have answers for some of these things. So, if you're hunting Pokemon, they can flee. You can have a Whirlwind or a Roar from one of them. They can do Self-Destruct or Explosion. They can have Final Gambit. They can do Perish Song, Memento, or even Teleport. Now, all of these would cause your chain to effectively break because you're going to miss one of these Pokemon. You're not going to catch it. And worst case scenario is if it's your shiny and that runs away, that would be just the most heartbreaking thing ever because your chain is broken and you didn't get the shiny. So that's just, So, we have some kind of specific answers for these that are also going to be, somewhat desirable for the Pokemon that we want to bring with us into battle. Now, the way you're going to do this, the easiest way to handle a lot of these is going to be Taunt. Now, obviously, Morpheus is not in the Pokemon games, but I thought this was pretty epic because this is exactly what Taunt looks like in the game pretty much. So, Taunt is going to be able to stop about half of those problems that we just covered. Now, it is a TM, and a lot of Pokemon also learn it naturally, which is pretty awesome. So, Whirlwind and Roar, Taunt will stop that for a number of turns. Memento, Teleport, and Perish Song, all of those will be stopped by Taunt. Now, it's very helpful to have a Taunt user on your team just because of this, and also to cover any random stuff that may happen. I mean, you may encounter a Pokemon that wants to put you to sleep, or paralyze you, or just burn you, anything like that. This is a good way to stop that from happening, and it's something that's really easy to bring with you. Now, obviously, this doesn't cover everything, so I did list some kind of more corner case situations as far as what you can do if you really know that one of the Pokemon you're going after has one of these kind of problematic attacks. There are some options as far as what you can do. Now, admittedly, a lot of these are a little more in-depth than they need to be, but if you're dealing with just a Pokemon that's going to flee, some options like Arena Trap, Shadow Tag, and Magnet Pull will keep those Pokemon held in battle and they cannot flee. So, they're not always 100% useful. Like Arena Trap doesn't work on Flyer, Shadow Tag doesn't work on Ghost Pokemon, Magnet Pull doesn't work on anything but Steel Mons, but again, better than nothing, it's something we have to work with. Now, you also have on top of that attacks like Mean Look, Block, Bind, Fire Spin, Infestation, Sand Tomb, Whirlpool, and Wrap, all of which can hold the Pokemon for a number of turns. Now, it's not permanent. The effect will eventually wear off, and you'll have to use it again, but it is a way to actually hold those Pokemon there so you can attempt to catch them. Now, let's talk about some other issues for the Pokemon using moves that may cause problems. Now, We said Whirlwind and Roar. Obviously, you know, I stand by Taunt being really the best option as far as that goes, but there are other options as well. So if you don't want to worry about that and you know the Pokemon you're hunting does use these moves frequently, Suction Cups is going to be a great way to get around that. So Suction Cups basically means when you're in battle against a Pokemon, if they try to make you switch out or, you know, go away, you're not going to. You're going to stay right where you are. Now, obviously that works for both, which is great. But if you do only have to worry about Roar, Soundproof is another reasonably good, you know, ability to have because it does kind of the same thing. It just blocks that sound, you know, based move. So you're not going to be able to be, you know, moved out by the Roar. All right, now moving on to Self-Destruct and Explosion. This is probably going to be the most helpful if you're hunting things like Geodude, Graveler, and Golem. There are some other Pokemon that have it, but really those are the ones that kind of spring to mind right away. So first of all, the best way to get around that is to have a Pokemon with Damp. So there are several Pokemon that have that ability, a lot of water types. And basically what that does, it prevents them from being able to explode themselves. So another option too, I didn't put it on here because it's kind of basic thinking, but aside from having Damp, if you just lead a Ghost user, they won't be able to use that move because it's ineffective on Ghost-type Pokemon. So, you know, it's not, you know, these aren't like foolproof methods, but they are certainly something that can help you out. Obviously, you know, in the case of like certain Ghosts like Gengar, they are going to be weak to those Ground-type moves that a lot of these Pokemon are going to have as well. So you just kind of want to make sure you're careful of that. But again, being able to really turn off that, you know, basically suicidal attack, that is a good way to do it, you know, because they are both normal type attacks and they will not work on Ghost Pokemon. Now, speaking of leading Ghost types, if they use Final Gambit, now there aren't a ton of Pokemon that have this, but there are some. If they do go for that move, if you lead a Ghost type, that will also solve the problem because, again, that move is not going to be effective on the Ghost type Pokemon, and therefore, it will not, you know, go through. It will stop that from being used. So, going down now, we have Parasong and Memento. Now, obviously, I highly recommend Taunt because the alternatives here are not great. But if you are sure that you're dealing with a Pokemon that has those, and you don't want to screw around with Taunt, your best option for both is going to be getting a Pokemon that has these and then using Imprison. So, again, I realize this is not the most practical way to handle this, but again, I did want to give you guys multiple options for each corner case. And if you do Imprison a Pokemon, they're not going to be able to use that move as long as you have that move, and as long as, you know, that Pokemon is still on the field. So, imprisoning them is actually a fairly reasonable way to go about doing it. It is just a little time-consuming to breed and, you know, train a Pokemon that has that move. But again, something to consider if you do want to, you know, really consistently prevent that attack from happening. Now, last but not least, we have Teleport here. Obviously, this is going to be most useful when we talk about Abra, but there are, you know, things like routes that can have it, so we want to make sure that we just have some answers that we know of. So we have Arena Trap being one of the best abilities for trapping them. Shadow Tag will work as well. The only problem, particularly if you're hunting Ralts, they can have Trace where they can actually copy your Shadow Tag, and Shadow Tag cannot trap Shadow Taggers, so that would allow them to still teleport out even though they are not a Ghost-type Pokemon. So, again, you know, it's kind of a corner case, but if you are hunting Ralts, which, spoiler, we are going to be talking about that Pokemon in a little bit here, you do want to make sure that you have a better option in place. And Arena Trap is just kind of a no-muss, no-fuss way of making sure that happens, and that you don't accidentally lose a Ralts because they happen to have Trace. Now, going down to the attacks, they're pretty similar to the fleeing issues. You know, Mean Look, Block, Bind, Fire Spin, Infestation, really all of those kind of, you know, binding moves, they will work as long as they are still doing damage. Now, again, keep in mind, if you are doing that repetitive damage, you can't just use a False Swipe to knock them down to 1. But again, you know, obviously, if you're just trying to hold them there to, you know, even get a chance of catching these things, those are going to be some reasonable options at your disposal. All right, so now that we know kind of what moves and what, you know, abilities, all that stuff we want to have on our Pokemon that we bring with us shiny hunting, what are the actual Pokemon that have these traits so we can really use them to succeed in our shiny hunts? Well, let's dive right in. Now, first and foremost, we have one of the Pokemon that should be very, very obvious, and that is Smeargle. Now, obviously, we have a shiny one here because we're shiny hunting, and also it was the best GIF I could find by miles. So anyways, what we have here for Smeargle, obviously Smeargle has that move Sketch. Now, it gets Sketch at every 10th level, so 10, 20, 30, etc. Sketch can be used to copy any ability in the entire game. Now, admittedly, this can be a little bit of a tedious process because you do have to make sure it's used after the last move that you want. So there's a couple different ways to do this. You can go into like a Wi-Fi battle against yourself or a friend, have them use the move you want, and then you sketch it, or you can do it in like double battles. As long as you have, you know, in-game, as long as you have the speeds, you know, perfectly synced up, You could do like, Spore them on and then sketch it. But yeah, like I said, some of the interesting things here with Smeargle, it has access to pretty much every status move. So it has access to Spore, Sleep Powder, all that good stuff. Has False Swipe. And if you want some of the other moves like Taunt, it has that. Really, Smeargle can do anything because it has all those attacks available to it. Now, admittedly, Smeargle stats are pretty horrible, but it does have the ability to actually have Moody, which can make some of those stats go higher, but some of them could go lower, so it's a little bit of a gamble. But again, just the fact that it has access to every attack in the entire game, no matter what, that is such a big deal that it's really worth using Smeargle, even though it's not, impressive in terms of its stats. The utility that it brings is just incredible. And while we're talking about utility, and just being able to have all these attacks, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the second Pokemon on this list, and that is, of course, Mew. Now, Mew does not learn every attack in the game, unfortunately, but Mew does get access to every single TM move. Now, what does this give it? Well, it gives it access to False Swipe, Thunder Wave to paralyze a Pokemon, and it also has access to Taunt. Now, the really cool thing about Mew is that you can actually get it in-game really, really early in Floroma Town as a gift. Now, as long as you have Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee save data on your Switch, when you see the old couple in Floroma Town, they will give you this Mew, no questions asked. So it is very low level, but that's okay because you can actually train it up and then give it all these TMs you want. So even though Mew does not learn a lot of shiny hunting attacks, naturally, the fact it can learn all the TMs is huge because it does give you access to False Swipe as well as some of those other moves. And that's kind of going to be a theme you're going to see with a lot of the more desirable mons on this list, is that they can just do 2 or 3 of the roles that we really wanted so consistently, and that really gives you a lot of ability to have multiple options of different things on your team, because as the more roles that one Pokemon can play, the more useful they are when it comes to shiny hunting. And on top of that, one thing I didn't even put on the list here, Mew also has access to Synchronize. So if you have a Mew that's, modest, timid, whatever, you'll be able to make that target Pokemon the same nature as well, saving you the need from getting a Mint. Now, obviously, that's just incredible. You can really manipulate whatever Pokemon you want, and that's just awesome. So going on from there, we are going to talk about my personal favorite mon for shiny hunting. Now, I try not to bring my own bias into this, but again, it is objectively one of the best mons for shiny hunting, and that is going to be Breloom. Now, Breloom is a grass fighting Pokemon, and it's kind of has a unique sort of niche in the shiny hunting world for a couple reasons. So it has access to Spore, which is incredible. Spore is the most accurate sleeping move in pretty much the entire game, so being able to put that target to sleep consistently with no problem is just awesome. Now, on top of that, it has a very high attack stat. I believe it's 130. So you're going to be knocking that Pokemon down to 1 HP with False Swipe very consistently, which is just awesome. That is exactly what you want, because in some of the games where the Pokemon have very low catch rates, them running out of PP and struggling themselves to death can be really kind of a serious problem. So being able to knock them down to 1 HP with only maybe 1 turn is huge. And on top of that high attack stat, it has access to Technician, so it's going to get boosted even more because the base power of False Swipe is so low. So being able to have access to these moderately powered False Swipes with a very high attack stat is huge. Now, on top of that, if you don't want to go with the Spore game and just keep putting it to sleep over and over again, you also have access to Stun Spore. So, Breloom, obviously you do have to get this guy in the Grand Underground, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but having access to all these tools all at the same time with that really awesome offensive stat makes this thing incredible on shiny hunting teams, because you really have somebody you can throw out there and just start chipping away at them and really just get those Pokemon to 1, catch them, move on. And that's why, especially with radar chaining, now with some other ones like Static Encounters, Breloom isn't as, incredible, but when it comes to just, encountering a lot of like random Pokemon over and over again, you really cannot do better than Breloom. And because of the high attack stat, if you need somebody who's a brawler, like you're dealing with a Reggie or something, you just need to take a big chunk out of their HP, he can do that too, because he has access to Bullet Seed, which is also Technician boosted, and Drain Punch. So this thing is an absolute powerhouse, and it's something to really consider if you are going to be doing a lot of shiny hunting. And while we're talking about high attack False Swipers, let's go ahead and talk about Galad. Now, Galad is the final evolution of Ralts, one of them, the other one being Gardevoir, but this Pokemon is Psychic and Fighting type and has a very high attack stat as well, but it also has access to False Swipe just like Breloom, and we know how good Breloom is, so this is kind of in the same boat. Now, it is also, just like Breloom, unfortunately weak to flying, but it does, still have a lot of offensive, benefits, and if you are up to like level 100, which really isn't that difficult, you really will be able to take a lot of those hits and be okay. Now, on top of that, it doesn't just have access to False Swipe, it has access to Hypnosis, Thunder Wave, Taunt, Mean Look, and Imprison. So, if you really need to deal with some specific threats, Galad is also a very good way to go about doing it. Now, Hypnosis is not as accurate as Spore, so there can be some issues there, obviously. But then again, if you don't want to mess around with that, it has access to Thunder Wave. And as we know, you can paralyze it and just start chucking Pokeballs. So it depends what you want to do. But again, Galad is an amazing option for shiny hunting as well. Now, speaking again of False Swipers here that can do other things, we got to talk about Parasect. Now, obviously the Cordyceps, cicada here. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about with that, I'm going to go ahead and link a video I have above where I explain exactly what Parasect is. Basically, it's a zombie, spoiler. So, Parasect has access to Spore, Stun Spore, and False Swipe. So obviously you can put that Pokemon to sleep, knock it down to 1 HP. Awesome. It's just a perfect Pokemon that can cover a lot of those kind of bases. But on top of that, it also has access to Sweet Scent, so you can trigger encounters that way. So, again, now, its False Swipe is not particularly powerful. Its attack stat is not that impressive. But again, having access to Spore, because Spore is just such an accurate, consistent way to put things to sleep, Parasect is a really good option, even though it's a terrifyingly creepy Pokemon, I get it. It really can do a lot for you when you really want to start, being serious about getting a lot of shiny Pokemon. And, on top of that, I also didn't put in the cards here. Parasect has access to 2 incredible abilities when it comes to shiny hunting as well. Now, I do not recommend using Effect Spore because you could accidentally poison the Pokemon and, knock it out that way. But it has access to Dry Skin and Damp. So, Dry Skin, again, can absorb water attacks and heal up, so they don't do any damage. Now, if you're hunting a water-type Pokemon, obviously this is pretty useful. Now, on top of that, it also has access to Damp, and we talked about that. It's not, an amazing ability, but it does stop those explosions and self-destructs if that is something you're worried about. So if you're hunting like Geodudes or Golems, that is something that's going to be very helpful for you. Now, kind of in a similar vein to Parasect is going to be actually a newcomer to the shiny hunting world as of Sword and Shield, I believe, and that's going to be Venusaur. Now, Venusaur in Gen 8 was given access to False Swipe, which is, well, perfect. Now, Venusaur obviously does not have quite as many tools as Parasect does, but again, it does have access to Sleep Powder, False Swipe, and Sweet Scent. It does, its abilities don't really come into play here because, Overgrow or Chlorophyll don't really matter as much with shiny hunting, but it is really cool, and, obviously, I'm going to have to put this on here. Venusaur gets a lot of nostalgia points. It is a Gen 1 starter, so because of that, obviously a lot of people want to use it. So if you do want to do that, Sleep Powder, and False Swipe is going to get you there, and it's going to be a really good way to be able to get those Pokemon asleep down to 1 HP so you can catch them. And of course, just like Parasect, it has access to Sweet Scent, so you can go ahead and get those encounters that way as well. Now, we covered kind of all the false swiping kind of strategies here, so we're going to kind of move away from that into some other utility options that you can bring with you for shiny hunting. And that is going to be bringing us into our next Pokemon here, which is going to be Gengar. Now, Gengar, shout out to Tom, it's his favorite Pokemon, so I hope you're happy about this guy being on the list. So, Gengar is pretty unique because it does, even though it doesn't have False Swipe, it has some very unique niches it has within the, sort of shiny hunting process. So, it has access to the moves Hypnosis, Taunt, and Mean Look. Now, unfortunately, we don't have Mega Gengar, so we can't do Shadow Tag. Dang it. But it does have those 3 moves, which are really, really helpful. And then being a Ghost type, it is immune to Final Gambit, Self-Destruct, and Explosions. So again, if you are hunting Pokemon that you know will have that kind of attack, bring a Ghost type like Gengar, and you will have access to make sure they can't flee, and you will also make sure they can't, KO themselves by using those moves because they won't be effective on Gengar. Now, moving on here, I know Gengar is supposed to be a very terrifying Pokemon, but I do have to say the next Pokemon we are bringing is going to be far more terrifying. Now, I'm sorry I had to expose you all to Mr. Mime. I am sorry, but believe it or not, Mr. Mime has some uses when it comes to shiny hunting. I know, I'm amazed I'm saying that myself, but just let's talk about it together here. So, Mr. Mime has access to Soundproof. Now, we talked about that with Roar. That's pretty helpful. It's pretty useful. And, it gets it from, originally Mime Jr., I believe, but when you evolve it up, it will, have Soundproof. It's just a helpful, kind of useful option on a team, especially if you know they're going to have Roar. A lot of the dog-type Pokemon, or, dog-style Pokemon can have that, so something to keep in mind. But on top of that, it has access to Hypnosis, Thunder Wave, and Taunt, so you are able to status Pokemon using it, which is cool. And I also wanted to put on here, it's a fairy type in a region with almost no fairies. So having that typing just, be in your sort of back pocket is cool because, there's a lot of random Pokemon. Like if you're hunting like dark Pokemon, it'll help balance that out a little bit. And, obviously if you're hunting a dragon type Pokemon, they can't use any of the dragon moves on you. So it is, even though it's not, as strong in terms of shiny hunting as it would be in like competitive, just having the access to have that immunity and have some of those resistances that the fairy type brings is pretty important in my opinion. And talking about fairies, I also want to talk real quick about Gardevoir. Now, Gardevoir also has some pretty unique features that it brings to a shiny hunting team. And obviously it's cool because it can hang out with Galad, the other half of Ralts, and both of them do very different roles. So, while Galad is off doing its false swiping and hypnosis thing, Gardevoir kind of has a different role that's still very important. So first up, Gardevoir has Synchronize. So as we talked about, you can use that to manipulate the natures of the Pokemon you're encountering. So, you can even do, like Bold or any of those like defensive boosting natures, or you can go, of course, Modest, which is a very sort of safe bet here with Gardevoir. So obviously those natures are both good. Modest is probably one of the better, natures you're going to encounter throughout competitive Pokemon, particularly with some of the legendaries like Kyogre. So being able to really set that with Synchronize here with Gardevoir is pretty huge. Now, the one thing I really like here is that Gardevoir can be a Wish Passer. Now, if you don't know what that is, Wish is a move that a lot of Pokemon get through events, but also a lot of Pokemon do learn. So the way Wish works is that you use it, and then on the following turn, you heal up equal to half of your HP. Now, the HP is calculated based on the Pokemon that uses Wish, not the Pokemon that's healed. So you can use Wish with Gardevoir and then switch out into another Pokemon. Now, the reason this is useful is because once that Pokemon that you're targeting is, either asleep or paralyzed, whatever, it is still going to get attacks off on you at some, way, at some point. It's going to be doing damage to you. And even the strongest Pokemon can take a lot of damage if it builds up over time. So, even if you're level 100 and you're chasing something that's like a 50 or a 60, it's not going to one-hit KO you probably unless it hits like a fissure or something like that. But it will chip away at you a lot and you can get down pretty low pretty quickly. So being able to switch this in to absorb some hits and then get a Wish off and then bring in another Pokemon and heal them back up, that's pretty huge, especially given that this Pokemon has some other things to offer as well. Now, I also talked about it being a fairy type, which I do, maintain. I think that's pretty useful in this region, particularly in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. But again, as far as utility moves, it does have access to Hypnosis, Taunt, Mean Look, and Thunder Wave. So you are able to status it two ways: taunt different Pokemon so they can't get any of their shenanigans off, and you're also able to Mean Look things so they can't flee. So again, Gardevoir here cannot, use False Swipe, but it can really, get these Pokemon under control and also help kind of round out your team once you have that Pokemon maybe down to 1 HP. And it can even help, just keep your Pokemon alive. So Gardevoir really has a lot to offer, which is really, really cool. And, it's just another way to really fill out that team and give you a lot of options as you're hunting these different Pokemon. So I listed about 9 different mons here that you're going to want to get if you are going to be doing some shiny hunting. So I want to make sure you guys know how to get those and where to get them. So Smeargle is going to be found on Route 212. Now again, it does not have any moves naturally except Sketch, and you don't want to use any moves on it except False Swipe because you don't want it to actually sketch any of those moves. But if you do, want to get things rolling, if you do encounter a Smeargle and use False Swipe on it, when it uses Sketch, it will gain False Swipe. So even though you're going to have to teach it the rest of those moves, it is helpful because you can actually get one of those taken out of the way already, and it will have False Swipe when you catch it. So something to keep in mind. It's just a useful little trick here. Mew, obviously, we said it's a gift. It's not actually a mystery gift, but it's just a gift Pokemon in the game. You do have to have Let's Go Pikachu or Eevee save data on your Switch, which is not that difficult. And obviously, if you don't want to buy the game, you are able to borrow one from a friend. The demos do not work, but you just have to get I believe your first save in there for it to count. So if you know somebody with the games, see if you can borrow it and just make a save file real quick so you don't have to mess around with that. And on top of that, you can find, copies used if you're really serious about it that way on things like eBay or on places like Facebook Marketplace, etc. Breloom is going to be in the Great Marsh. You're going to probably have to find it as Shroomish, but you are able to train it up pretty easily. And again, most of its moves it learns through either just naturally level up or TMs, which is great. Galad is going to be found as Ralts in Route 203, 204, and the Great Underground. Not a lot to talk about there, except it is going to be the same for Gardevoir, so keep that in mind that if you want to have both of these Pokemon on your team, you're going to need to catch more than one Ralts. Parasect is going to be in the Great Marsh and the Grand Underground. You're going to find it most likely as Paras, but again, you can level it up no problem. Alright, and then Venusaur is going to be found as a Bulbasaur in the Grand Underground. Now, it learns a lot of its moves through level up, which is great, but you do need that TM for False Swipe in order to teach it that. Gengar. Ghastly appears in a bunch of different places, so it's going to be Route 209, the Old Chateau, Lost Tower, and the Grand Underground. A lot of these mons are in the Grand Underground. There is everything in there. It's awesome. And then we have Mr. Mime appearing as either Mr. Mime or I believe Mime Jr. So we have routes 218 and 222. That's Brilliant Diamond only. So it is a pseudo-exclusive, I'll say, because you can find it in the Grand Underground in both games. But again, if you do want to find it on those routes, it's going to be Brilliant Diamond only. And then, as we said, of course, Gardevoir is going to be found on routes 203, 204, and the Grand Underground as a Ralt. And you can get, more than one and add those to your team. So you can get both Galad and Gardevoir, which are just going to be really helpful in giving you a lot of those, utility options that you want for your team. So there you have it, everybody. That is every Pokemon that you want to bring with you when you go shiny hunting. Obviously, you can only take 6 with you at one time, but having all these Pokemon will give you a lot of options. So no matter what Pokemon you're going after, you'll have at least a plan in place to be able to find them and then catch them when the shiny one does appear. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it interesting, and most importantly, you found it helpful, and that you're able to use these tips and find these Pokemon to really get a lot of shiny Pokemon to add them to your collection. So if you did enjoy the video and you're able to use it for some degree of success, please make sure that you absolutely impact that like button in the face, and again, consider subscribing to become part of our amazing Pokemon community, because we have videos that go up like this all the time, and you are not going to want to miss them. That being said, everybody, I've been Blaine for Bridge4 Games. As always, remember that the best Pokemon games are the ones that you love to play, and the proper ways to play them are however you have the most fun. I hope each and every one of you have an awesome, epic, and amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. See you around. Bye-bye.